You've made some of the worst decisions of your life by mistaking fear for intuition, and you've probably ignored some of the best guidance you ever received because it felt exactly like fear when it first showed up. That confusion right there has cost people relationships, money, years of their life, and most of them never even realized the two things were ever in competition because nobody ever taught them the actual difference, just told them to trust their gut, like that phrase explains anything at all. Let's be precise, because precision is the entire point here. Fear and intuition often arrive through the exact same physical channel, the gut, the chest, that tightening sensation right behind your sternum. And that's exactly why people confuse them so consistently. The body doesn't hand you a neat label that says, this one's fear and this one's intuition. It just sends a signal, and your mind, untrained, grabs whatever interpretation is closest at hand, which is usually whichever one you're more practiced at listening to. For most people, that's fear, because fears had decades of repetition built into it, while intuitions had almost none. Here's the actual distinguishing line, and I want you holding on to this specifically. Fear is loud, repetitive, and almost always rooted in a story about the past or a catastrophic prediction about the future. It talks, it builds entire scenarios full of dialogue, full of imagined outcomes, full of what if this happens, then what if that happens. Intuition doesn't do any of that. Intuition is quiet, single, and almost always rooted in the present moment with no narrative attached to it whatsoever. It doesn't argue its case. It doesn't need to convince you with 20 reasons. It simply states something once calmly and moves on, leaving you to either listen or override it with noise. This is why fear is so much easier to follow. It does the convincing for you. It builds the whole courtroom case, complete with evidence, complete with a verdict you're terrified to ignore. Intuition never bothers building a case because it doesn't need your agreement to be true. That's actually the tell. If something needs you to argue yourself into believing it, repeating reasons, building a narrative, working yourself up into the feeling, that's fear doing its job. If something simply sits there quiet and certain without needing your participation to remain true, that's intuition. I want to give you a real example because none of this means anything without application. Say you're about to take a new job and something in you hesitates. Fear's version of that hesitation sounds like a full monologue. What if I fail? What if everyone sees I'm not qualified? What if I lose this opportunity and regret it forever? What if, what if, what if? It's loud, it's detailed, and it's almost entirely about imagined futures that haven't happened yet. Intuition's version of that same hesitation is almost insultingly simple by comparison. This isn't it. No elaboration, no 15 reasons, just a quiet, settled knowing that doesn't need backup. Same decision, two completely different internal voices, and most people can't tell which one they just followed until years later, looking backward, finally able to see which voice was actually right. Now, before y'all start treating every queasy stomach like it's the universe sending you a sacred transmission, let me pull this back down to earth, because some of you are about to start blaming intuition for the fact that you just ate some questionable gas station sushi at 11 at night. Not every gut feeling is metaphysical. Sometimes your stomach's just talking about your stomach, and the fastest way to lose all credibility with this work is treating literal indigestion like a prophecy. Discernment goes both directions. Don't dress up anxiety as intuition. And don't dress up bad food choices as a spiritual download either. Here's why this distinction actually matters at the level we're talking about in this channel, not just as a cute self-help concept. Your mind makes it real constantly based on what you've decided to trust as true. And if you've spent your whole life training yourself to trust the loud, dramatic voice over the quiet, settled one, you've essentially built your entire decision-making structure on top of the least reliable narrator available to you. Fear is reactive. It's built entirely out of past pain and projected catastrophe, neither of which is actually happening right now. Intuition is responsive to what's real in this moment without the distortion of old wounds dressing themselves up as present-day warnings. When you can't tell the two apart, you're not just confused, you're systematically handing your decisions over to the part of your mind least equipped to make them well, while ignoring the part that's actually been trying to guide you correctly the entire time. So, how do you actually build the skill of telling these two voices apart in real time, in the moment when you're standing in the decision and don't have years of hindsight available to sort it out after the fact? First, check for narrative. This is the fastest, most reliable filter available to you. And it works almost every time once you start practicing it. Ask yourself, in the moment the feeling shows up, is this a story or is this a single statement? Fear almost always comes wrapped in a story, complete with characters, complete with consequences, complete with a whole imagined future playing out in your head like a movie you didn't ask to watch. Intuition shows up as a single line said once without elaboration. If you notice yourself building an entire scenario complete with dialogue and worst case endings, you're listening to fear, no matter how convincing the scenario feels in the moment. Second, check the timing. Fear is almost always about something that hasn't happened yet, some imagined future outcome you're trying to protect yourself from in advance. Intuition is almost always about right now, this exact moment, this specific person, this specific situation in front of you without reference to some catastrophic tomorrow. If the feeling you're experiencing requires you to imagine a future event to make sense of it, you're dealing with fear's territory. If it's simply responding to what's actually present right now, that's intuition's territory. Third, and this one takes the most practice because it requires real honesty with yourself, check whether the feeling needs your participation to stay convincing. Fear requires you to keep feeding it, keep rehearsing the scenario, keep building the case, or it starts losing its grip. That's exactly why anxious thoughts feel like they need constant attention. Because the second you stop actively feeding the narrative, the fear genuinely starts to lose power. Intuition needs none of that. It said what it said. You can walk away from it entirely, go about your whole day, and come back to it hours later, and it'll still be sitting there unchanged, exactly as quiet and exactly as certain as it was the first time. That stability without your active participation is the single most reliable sign you're dealing with something other than fear. I want to be honest about the hard part of all this because I'm not interested in making this sound easier than it actually is. Even once you know the difference intellectually, fear is going to keep winning some rounds because fear's had a massive head start and intuition's voice has been buried under decades of noise. For most of you, you're going to misread a few of these. You're going to follow fear dressed up as intuition and regret it. You're going to ignore real intuition because it didn't come with enough drama to feel important. That's not failure. That's just the actual cost of rebuilding a skill that should have been taught to you young and wasn't. And let's be real for a second. Some of y'all are out here making the exact same mistake your whole life and calling it a pattern. Like that makes it sound more spiritual than it actually is. You ignored the quiet voice. You followed the loud one straight off a damn cliff. And now you're back here a year later wondering why the same shit keeps happening with different names and different faces attached to it. It's not a curse. It's not bad luck following you around. It's the same untrained habit repeating itself because you never once stopped to ask which voice you were actually listening to in the moment it mattered. Hell, half of what people call intuition after the fact is just hindsight wearing a costume, looking back and pretending they knew all along when really they just got lucky that time. Your mind is your greatest friend or your greatest adversary. And the voice you've trained yourself to trust without question determines which one is currently running your decisions. Most people aren't bad decision makers. They're just listening to the loudest voice in the room instead of the truest one. And they've never once stopped to ask whether those happen to be the same voice or two completely different ones wearing the same physical sensation as a disguise.